Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session, The Art of Digital Storytelling. My goodness, look how many people have joined us. It's amazing to see you all today, and I hope you're all well. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. My name is Gemma, and I'm from the Expo North Digital team. Expo North Digital is Highlands and Islands Enterprises mechanism for specialist digital support for the creative and heritage economies across the Highland region, and the project is delivered by the Ironworks venue. This workshop is part of HIE's Northern Innovation Hub, which is designed to build on and accelerate business innovation. It's funded through the Inverness and Highland City Region deal, which is a joint initiative supported by £315 million of investment from the UK and Scottish governments, Highland Council, HIE and UHI. And I'm now going to pass over to Alex Smith, who is our project lead from the Expo North Digital team.
Thank you, Gemma, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate you giving up your time and giving us your attention. And I'm going to be really quick because I know we have a lot on, but this is the final ever Expo North workshop. So we're particularly pleased to have you with us. And as Ironworks, we're really grateful to deliver the Expo North programme across its various formats for many years. And on behalf of myself, Caroline, James, Gemma, Claire, we'd like to thank you, and also to Jessica, Nicola, Tim, Peter, Joan, Pamela, Dougal, our sector specialist. It's been such a pleasure for your support. We've really enjoyed bringing these programs to you. And we want to extend a very special thanks to our quite remarkable funders, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and particularly to Ian Hamilton for his vision and, frankly, his relentless energy and commitment to the sector over many years, and to Jenny Oliver as well. The project is still live till 31st of January next year, and we have a really extensive suite of content, podcasts, workshops, conference content. So please do stay connected with us over the next couple of months. And for today's session, if you want to put your questions in the chat, I know we've got a lot to get through. I'm going to do my very best to get them to Jessica for you before the session ends. And with that, Jess, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Alex. It is really sad that this is the last event for Expo North. It's been going on for so many years. I know I recognize so many of your faces and names. I know you've been working with us. I just wanted to say everyone welcome, and maybe this will kick off some wonderful inspirations where you guys go off and do some awesome things. So we'll try to fit in as much as possible into an hour. I will properly introduce myself in a second, but I'm much more interested in you. There is a chat box down below, and if you could just tell me a little bit about like what industry you're from, that would help me as we are kind of diving into storytelling, in case I have some pointers specifically towards the industry that you're coming from or representing, or your specific interest or what you do and why, maybe a little bit about why you're here. And I'll keep on glancing at the chat box throughout. I am going to be talking a lot. So if you have questions, please put them also in the chat box. Alex will be kind of making a note of them, and I will try to leave time at the end to kind of engage and do some kind of back and forth Q&A. Last but not least, this is not just a passive session. There are going to be some exercises. And do not worry, you won't have to share the work that you're creating. This is just for you. But does everyone have an old school pen and pencil and paper? I don't want you typing this out. It's really important that you kind of actually have a connection between the brain and the hand and allow the kind of thoughts to flow that way. So great, we have tourism industry, we have charities and marketing, we have TV and interest in digital storytelling. We're definitely going to dive into digital storytelling. This is all great. Special collections and archives. We have an absolute kind of really diverse group of people here, artist and curator, applied arts. This is local historian. Great. Hopefully all of this should be helpful for everyone. That's really, really good to know. So I am going to share my screen. I'm also going to play videos, so my volume is going to go up pretty loud. If anyone has difficulty hearing, please just let me know in the chat box or seeing. So storytelling is a really massive topic, and we are going to dive into a little bit about the background of storytelling, why we're even here talking about storytelling, some academics and their thoughts about what makes a good story. And then we're going to go into digital storytelling and really looking at kind of some hacks to blogs, podcasts, social media, but essentially when you're thinking about digital storytelling, when you're thinking about representing yourself within a story, what are the key things to include and what we're looking for? So to kick off, a respected MIT professor said your success will be determined by 3 things, and here's how to get better at each of them. The quality of ideas is important, but even more important is your ability to communicate those ideas. Before he died, beloved MIT professor Patrick Winston regularly gave a fascinating and deeply compelling lecture to university students about the value of good communication. In his introduction, he drew attention to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which calls for court-martial for any officer who sends soldiers into battle without a weapon. Winston says there ought to be a similar protection for students, and I might add, a protection for should be provided for entrepreneurs, aspiring business owners. I would include people from the heritage sector, from the arts sector, from pretty much any sector too, namely that no one should go through life without being armed with the ability to properly communicate. Because, and Winston puts it, your success in life will be determined largely by your ability to speak, by your ability to write, and the quality of your ideas in that order. So why are stories so important for communication? I think you can boil it down to Antonio Porcia's quote, he was a South American poet. He actually helped create a new kind of printing press. He was a really interesting man. And he said, I know what I have given you and I don't know what you've received. And I think that's really true. I could be communicating, but have no idea what you're coming to this talk with, what your morning's been like, what's on your mind. And there's an enormous gap between my intention for what I'm communicating and what you're actually receiving. And stories really are a tool that can build that bridge back. And the question is why? Why are stories so good at that? They're able to communicate a complex and very memorable amount of information, feelings, lessons, and values. When you're in film school, or at least in film school in Prague, they tell you that an actor only listens to the first 3 things you say. So you're able to say, look at the camera, move, make sure the light's on your face and feel sad. And beyond that, they won't remember. And you can become a little bit more empathetic to that when you think of, if I were to tell you how to build a fence, and I'm telling you, look, you need to put in the posts first and then the nails, and you're not allowed to write any of it down. You're going to have to remember everything I say. You probably will remember the first 3 steps, and beyond that, it might get a little hazy, unless I couch it in a story. So if I were to tell you, look, I got these posts from Juicens and they just didn't fit. There were these long, thick posts. I was supposed to get these really thin posts. And actually, I got the right nails. A guy helped me with that. They were the really amazing silver nails. So I had to go back. I get the thin posts. I put the nails in, and you won't believe who turns up. And I just creating a story out of it. You'll probably remember the whole story. And within that is embedded how to build a fence. It's much easier to remember. I think Sherlock Holmes uses a very similar technique calling his mind palace. Actually, context of information is very important. Speaking of context, who am I? So I grew up in Boston. I'm an American. I've been living in Scotland for 16 years, probably because I watched a lethal amount of Anne of Green Gables on repeat. And I always have loved space and astronomy and the stars. So I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. I didn't know how to make money while doing it. And I ended up consulting for science companies talking about storytelling. And I became the storyteller at NASA. And while I was doing that, I had dreams of working in a bookshop by the sea in Scotland. Again, see Anne of Green Gables, watching copious amounts. I think it completely affected my imagination. And I ended up leaving that job and coming to Scotland and working in a bookshop, falling in love with the bookshop owner and staying. And although it didn't work out with the bookshop owner, it did work out with Scotland. I started a production company here. And then I started working for science organizations again, and also the Scottish government, which is how I ended up working with Expo North. But I make films, I write books, and we have a couple of TV shows currently in development. Jay Schillinghoy really likes description of mythology from, let's go backwards, an 1842 lecture of the philosophy of mythology said, it's a phenomenon which in profundity and permanence and universality is compared with only nature herself. And the reason why I love this so much, if you replace mythology with storytelling or stories, we're going to go into a little bit about what academics say about storytelling, but I don't want you to forget that it's pretty primal. Regardless of the information that you know about stories, it really comes from your primal subconscious. It is innate within you, as organic as nature itself. If you've never studied stories, you will be able to talk in story, as they say in Hawaii. You'll be able to tell a story. You'll be able to hear a story. Your mind will be able to transport yourself into the story. It's as fundamental as our DNA. So I don't want to overcomplicate the issue by offering tons of information to you, which I am about to do. I just want you to remember, especially for the exercises we're about to do, you have all the information you need to know to be amazing storytellers. So narrative is one of the oldest knowledge transfer systems in the world. Is anyone familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh? A couple of you are. Few, excellent. Yes, Beatrix, I knew you would be. It comes from around 2100 BC, maybe up until they can't properly date it. Maybe some people say it could be as late as 1200 BC. And I love beginning with the Epic of Gilgamesh because it's one of the first oral stories that we have found that's been written down. And it comes from between the Tigris and Euphrates River in a place called Sumer. And it's basically one of the coolest stories to find because it has everything you want in a good story in it. It's a great example of a story. It's a road trip. It's a search for immortality. It's a buddy movie. There's the Madonna horror complex, and it has like everything that we seem to be struggling with within our storytelling in this one story. And for those who don't know, it's a story about a young man who's incredibly lonely, Gilgamesh. And so the gods create him a best friend called Enkidu. It's a great name if you want a pet, the name it Enkidu. And Enkidu is made of clay, so doesn't survive very long. But while Enkidu was alive, they were like the best of friends, Gilgamesh. And once Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is even more bereft and more alone than he was at the start of the story. And so he decides to go and search for immortality. And I am sorry, this is a ruining the ending for you, which I hope is okay. But he goes in search of immortality, has these incredible adventures, and ends up dying because he's human. However, his story was written into a tree. And actually, the journey for the search of everlasting life becomes his everlasting life, which is a story. That's what lives on. So the Epic of Gilgamesh is a wonderful example of the power of story, and it's one of the first written stories we have an example of, which is pretty amazing. Stories are a big business. So I don't know if anyone's read these, but these are kind of some seminal books about storytelling. There's Aristotle's Poetics, where he says there's 3 stories that exist. Modern day Robert McKee, he's a story doctor in Hollywood. If anyone's seen the movie Adaptation, he features in it. He says there's really one way to write a story, and every scene within a story, he boils down to either beginning negative and ending positive, or beginning positive and ending negative. And that's basically, you don't need to read the book. That's basically his thesis. There are only 2 ways to write a story by John Galashaw. That's a very interesting book that came out in the 1920s. And then there's Joseph Campbell, who started in the 1950s, wrote throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, was on TV, and he helped create Star Wars. That was his kind of claim to fame. Hollywood adopted him, and The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the hero's journey, has become synonymous with modern day screenwriting. It's a very interesting book. It is also a little dated. So Maria Tatar, who was head of children's literature at Harvard, wrote an answer to Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is the heroine with a thousand faces, because she thought the hero with a thousand faces was a little gendered. I love Maria. She was on a podcast of ours. She's one of my favorite story thinkers. And I loved her book too, but I personally have never found the hero journey gendered. I always found it kind of gender neutral, but her book is really, really fascinating and worth reading. So what is the hero journey? Because everyone in storytelling, whether it's digital storytelling, whether you're working for a PR firm, whether you're trying to write a didactic in a museum, whether you're trying to craft a screenplay, knows this structure. And going back to mythologies like nature herself, this seems to be in us. In different cultures, this structure pops up everywhere. And it begins with a call to adventure. It goes to have some kind of supernatural aid. If you want to think actually about this structure kind of like Newton's 3 laws of physics, an object will stay in motion unless an outside force acts upon it. That's the supernatural aid or call to adventure or inciting incident, as they say in a screenwriting. At the very peak of the story, a hero is going to meet its equal of two opposites is what James Joyce calls it when a hero meets the antagonist. So the values of the hero are kind of the negative values of the antagonist. And then there is a transformation by battling that shadow side if you're a Jungian. And then there's an atonement and also a return. And the return's the most interesting bit to me because often a hero will get their special powers, insight, knowledge, growth, and like the Buddha, sit underneath the Bodhi tree and been like, I'm good. I see my past lives, my future lives. I don't need to move anywhere. In actual, the real hero journey is about taking all that new knowledge and returning to the world and teaching or giving back. So I'm going to play a quick video to illustrate how universal it is. You will be able to hear it once they start talking.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world, but the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie. Does it follow this pattern? Status quo, that's where we start. 1 o'clock, call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock, assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock, departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. Not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock, trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock, approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock, crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock, treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock, result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock, return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock, new life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely, but let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey template. When does Katniss Everdeen hear a call to adventure that gets the story moving? When her sister's name is called from the lottery. How about assistance? Is anyone going to help her on her adventure? Hey, Mitch. What about departure? Does she leave her ordinary world? She gets on a train to the capital. Okay, so you get the idea. What do you have in common with Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo? Well, you're human, just like them. The hero's journey myth exists in all human cultures and keeps getting updated because we humans reflect on our world through symbolic stories of our own lives. You leave your comfort zone, have an experience that transforms you, and then you recover and do it again. You don't literally slay dragons or fight Voldemort, but you face problems just as scary. Joseph Campbell said, "In the cave you fear to enter lies the treasure you seek." What is the symbolic cave you fear to enter? Auditions for the school play? Baseball tryouts? Love? Watch for this formula in books, movies, and TV shows you come across. You will certainly see it again, but also be sensitive to it in your own life. Listen for your call to adventure. Accept the challenge, conquer your fear, and claim the treasure you seek. And then do it all over again.
So you get the idea. And it's becoming very heady storytelling. I want to pull it back into your body so you feel confident that regardless of your area of work, that you're able to pull out some of these tools. So we're just going to fly through these. Joseph Campbell says there's 4 major functions to storytelling and mythology. There's the mystical one, that's more about an emotional realization. Cosmological, which connects the self to the world and your role in it. Sociological is about power relationships, taboos, often they're like fairy tales. And pedagogical, which help us through transitions in life, like coming of age stories. He also talks about, and other mythologists talk about, that functional mythology should put you in harmony with the world as is, our knowledge, our visible horizons. Which is why Star Wars and sci-fi seems to be kind of the new frontier of massive mythologies. But really, it's as basic. Kind of try to forget the hero journey for a second. It's as basic as every good storyteller basically lights the creative imagination within the audience because their imagination is lit. I think often when we go into storytelling, we see is it something separate from inside ourselves. But really the first thing, ground zero, is you become inspired. You find out what's interesting to you, the images that are intriguing you, the characters that are intriguing you. You know, again, if you work in PR, maybe there's a thread of a story that for some reason is calling to you more than others. It's about trusting those instincts. So we are going to, skipping over that, how do you start doing that in a world that's pretty analytical? How do you get back into that sense of play again with yourself? How do you give yourself time to actually do that? And I really love this. Joseph Campbell says you must have a room or a certain hour or so a day where you don't know what was in the newspapers that morning. You don't know who your friends are. You don't know what you owe anybody. You don't know what anybody owes you. This is the place where you bring forth what you are and what you might be. This is the place of creative incubation. At first, you may find that nothing happens there, but if you have a sacred place and use it, something will eventually happen. When I was working at the University of Edinburgh, I was charged with going around to the synthetic biology lab, the scientists that work there, and extracting stories from them and asking them about their work. And Dr. Abnor Sufi was one of my favorites, and I went up to him. He was at the Regenerative Medical Lab, which is this beautiful new building. And he didn't look happy to see me. I walked into his glass office and I sat down and I was like, oh, I'm so happy to meet you. I really admire your work. I can't wait to hear some of your stories. And you just saw his shoulders slump. And he said, look, I'm sure you're doing really good work here, but I need to tell you from my perspective, look at my office. It's completely clear. It's glass. Anyone can see what I'm doing. I share it with someone else. And when I want to get a coffee, this kind of open workspace thing has been instituted where they put the coffee maker in the busiest part of the lab so that you end up talking to everybody. It's supposed to help with communication. So he says, I do that. I come back. My students come in. He said, literally the only time I get to be alone with my own thoughts is the bus ride from the lab back home where my kids are waiting for me. And I thought that was so interesting because he's talking about what Joseph Campbell is talking about. The real importance, if we want to get back in touch with our imagination, which is where stories come from and where our instinct for stories come from, we just need time to look out the window and not think about anything and actually allow the room for our minds to wander. You're going to hear a little bit later, and I'm going to have to pick up the pace, about some people who work in podcasts and also blogs talking about the power of association. This reminded me of this, reminds me of this, reminds me, and suddenly you have a story. But you're not able to flex those powers, those muscle memory of association if you don't give yourself time to let your mind wander. It is so critically important for creativity, for innovation, for new ideas. So we are going to do just that. Does everybody have their pen, pencil, and paper at hand? Lovely. Perfect. So we're going to do an exercise that a lot of writers do every morning. I learned this through one of my screenplay writing teachers, and you listen to a piece of music and you close your eyes and you breathe and you just allow your mind to start thinking of things or creating things. And whatever it is, you write it down. I'll give you some prompting words as we're listening, and then you'll slowly hear me fade out, and I will leave you alone with your own thoughts. The image I really like with this is Sarah Moon's photography. She's one of my favorites. And this image is called Little Red Riding Hood, which I think is really beautiful. So the person who wrote this music is a gentleman named John Cusiak. He scores all of Errol Morris's documentaries. He's one of my favorite composers for film. And so he allowed me to use some of his music very kindly. So is everyone ready? There's no have-tos. You literally just close your eyes and hear the music, and I'll give you some prompting. So close your eyes and breathe. So when you're ready, this makes you feel something. You see an image. Open your eyes and begin writing. The first question I ask myself is, where am I? Am I inside? Am I outside? What does the air feel like? Are there other people there? What's the light doing? What time of year is it? Do I know this world? Am I somewhere else? So once you start keying in, you can start opening your eyes and writing. And if you lose the thread, just stop and close your eyes again. There's no have to's. Let the music wash over you. Let your mind associate, like, oh, that's interesting. What does that lead to? Details are your friends. So if one image comes to you, be as detailed as possible. Tell me what the colors are. Texture, sound. Allow it to transform. It's like you're watching a movie. Allow things to just happen and take note of them. Okay, and then find a nice place to pause. Find an ending for yourself. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Great. So wherever you are, this is going to feel really weird, but pause, kind of shake your head, your arms like an Etch-a-Sketch, just kind of clear that for a second. And we're going to go on to another one. This is a muscle that you just keep on building. Here we go. Very different. The first thing to do is just close the eyes. Just close the eyes, let them close, and breathe. Allow the music to enter your mind.
Jessica, the music isn't playing clearly here. You're not able to get your point across very well, I'm afraid. There's a lot of interference somewhere.
I'll stop talking. Do you guys understand the process? I'll stop talking in between. Details are your friend. You listen. Thank you for letting me know that. You listen to the music. Details are your friend. There's no have-tos, but you ask yourself, what does the air feel like? What time of year is it? What are the colors? I really like the question, what is the light doing? Find that very helpful. So on we go.
Hi, sorry, we just can't hear it.
Yes.
We can't
can't
hear
hear
the No.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, at home, that's an exercise I recommend you do. I recommend you close your eyes, you hear the music, and you start writing what you see. And the moment the music changes, you change paper. Just flip it over. It's going to feel a little harsh. And you keep on doing that, and you'll start really warming up that associative part of the brain. The part of the brain that's not the self-critic, the part of the brain that's the yes and. The, oh, I see this, and then leads to this. And it's a great way to build up that muscle. Sorry about that. That usually works. But if at home, try it out. John Cusack's work I really love just because there's no dialogue. And I find that it's very colorful, and each song has a very different vibe. So John Cusack and his work is online. So I'm going to skip over this. Storytelling for a digital age. We've gone in very much into the past. We've gone into the present about intellectual storytelling. We're starting to kind of try to warm up that associative part of our brain. Storytelling for the digital age is a little different in terms of what the emphases are. So if you're representing yourself, we're going to look at that. And also if you're representing an organization that you work for. There are 3 things you need to remember for storytelling for the digital age, and they might sound a little odd, but they do work. Feelings, metaphor, and you. Your tastes, your interests, what interests you, your passions. A friend of mine, Robert Twigger, I really recommend his work. He's an adventure journalist, and he writes some fantastic books like Angry White Pajamas. He also, he works and coaches writers. And he was talking about when writers say they have writer's block, or when a filmmaker feels like they don't know what to make, or they're stuck, or again, if you're working for a museum and there might be a plethora of stories to tell and you're not completely sure the approach of how to approach your audience or what to do. He says the best thing you can do is go into a store and look around and start thinking to yourself, I like that, I don't like that, I like that color, I don't like that. Go into a museum, any museum, and say, I love that object, I don't like that painting, I love that chair, I love and you just start surrounding yourself with your own tastes and what gets you excited again. So the Occam's razor, the simplest solution is often the best one. You need to put you back into the storytelling for digital storytelling. It might feel a little uncomfortable, but it really, really works. It connects with the audience. So feelings. How do you put feelings into a story? Again, not to rely too heavily on Joseph Campbell, but he has some great quotes. He talks a lot about that people say that we're always looking for a meaning to life, and he thinks that's not what we're really seeking. He thinks we're seeking the experience of being alive. And the reason why you put feelings back into stories is because that's what people connect to. Through you and through that story, they are trying to connect with that feeling of being alive again. Something to always, really, really always remember. It's at the core of every good story in the digital age. Tell me if you can hear this. Oh, that I will skip over that when we don't have time. So metaphor. Does anybody remember the difference between metaphor and simile from your school? Yeah, so great. So this will be a repeat, but metaphor never uses the word is. The is implied. So my first day of work, I was a deer in headlights, totally shocked. That's a metaphor. My first day at work, I was like a deer in headlights is a simile. And the digital age Again, feelings works purely on metaphor. Metaphor is active, it's storytelling. It puts us in an imaginative world. It gives us images to think about. Metaphor is one of the most powerful tools that you could be using. I like to create a metaphor out of a metaphor. If anybody remembers algorithms and quadratic formulas, but basically it is metaphor is so powerful because the meaning is the derivative of the vehicle. So you're giving someone a beautiful image, a deer in headlights, and actually underneath it, the thing that's fueling it is some really powerful meaning. Going back to, I know what I have given you, I don't know what you've received. Metaphor is a really wonderful way to build that bridge. Another way, let's say I'm talking about making a movie and I'm trying to communicate to you that it was really difficult because everyone had their own roles and we were kind of spread out over actually quite a big set. And it was really difficult. Our walkie-talkies weren't working and it was really difficult to communicate with everyone. And I could say that to you. Or I could say, honestly, yesterday's shoot was like herding cats. And that would be a simile. Or I could say, yesterday's shoot was herding cats. It was crazy. And suddenly you're in it. It's a vehicle, it has energy. So Joseph Campbell is a storyteller. He's an oral storyteller. I really recommend looking up his work too. He never writes anything down. He lives within a community, sometimes for about a year, and collects stories from that community, and then creates an oral story that speaks to the heart of the community he spent time in. So he's done this for the Steel Mill Workers Union in America. He just worked with the Emily Dickinson Institute and created an Emily Dickinson story. We hired him when I was at NASA, and he created the first oral story of a government organization. He did it for a town, Jonesboro, Tennessee, where there's an international storytelling festival. And this is him talking about why metaphor is so important. Can you guys hear him? You might be able to hear him talking.
T minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have liftoff. 2 years ago, NASA commissioned me to create a story in honor of its 50th anniversary. Why would NASA commission a story to be told? NASA has movies, novels, documentaries. Let me tell a little story to answer why. Years ago, I was in Detroit and a woman came up and said, I want to tell you about my work. She said, I'm working with children who are dying of leukemia. She said, I was working with Jonathan, 11 years old. Jonathan got very sick and Jonathan said, when I die, cast my ashes on Lake Michigan. Well, Jonathan died and his parents and Charlie, Jonathan's brother, 5 years old, the three of them went out on Lake Michigan. They had a nice old green boat with a motor and cast Jonathan's ashes. And Jonathan's mother said, look at that butterfly, colorful. That's Jonathan. They went out again. Mother said, oh, it is. It's a monarch. That's Jonathan. And another time they were on the beach. And Charlie, 5 years old, had a stick. And Charlie is stirring up the sand. And an old gray moth flew up. And Charlie said, look, that's Jonathan, but he's wearing a different shirt. What an image for death, wearing a different shirt. I think that's why NASA commissioned, because stories are very human. And they're the voice of an ordinary person. And NASA wants everyone to know they have a voice there.
So you can find Jay O'Callahan's NASA story on YouTube for free. And you can actually watch it. It's a really, really brilliant love letter to NASA, to being human, to space exploration. So we have feelings, we have metaphor, and then your tastes, your interests. There's a million ways to tell the same story. You will tell it in your own wonderful way. So ultimately, I had a film teacher who said, I can't teach you anything. because all you can do is make what you like and hopefully other people like it too. And that's basically it. You've got to go with what you think's interesting, with what excites your imagination. Again, a good storyteller is able to light the creative imagination within the audience. So NASA had this idea that they were going to send people into space to grow vegetables, to grow plants, and they were supposed to report back. And I think this is so fun because what NASA didn't anticipate were the scientists were lonely in space, and it was actually quite moving for them to have other green growing things there. And they became quite attached to the zucchini plant for its courgette, for people here, the courgette plant that they were growing. And so instead of actually just reporting, look, it grew this many inches and this is what we watered it, they started writing back Diary of a Space Zucchini. And actually, NASA was quite worried about their mental health until they realized this was a wonderful creative outlet for them. So I sprouted, thrust into this world without anyone consulting me. I am not one of the beautiful. I am not one that by any other name instills flutters in the human heart. I am the kind that makes little boys gag at the dinner table and thus being sent to bed without their dessert. I am utilitarian, hardy vegetable matter that can thrive under harsh conditions. I am zucchini, and I am in space. And so they would get this back instead of actual scientific data. But what was absolutely brilliant was it completely took off. I mean, people started logging in to see the next installment of Diary of a Space Zucchini. So this is also a wonderful way to show perspective is great. Being playful is great. You know, if you're working in a museum, you can have objects talk. There's loads of ways to enter a story. And again, Joe Callahan would say stories are working with energy. Go where the energy is, which I really love. We are going to go over Sparks. So then there's also all different kinds of ways to tell short stories right now in the digital age. There's the Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, all different kinds of ways and more coming. Instagram threads. And ultimately in this environment, what inspires you, the you in the storytelling thrives. It's a little bit of a narcissistic sense, self-centered storytelling age, but you do have to embrace it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about you, but just like Diary of a Space Zucchini, it has to light your own creative imagination. That's what you lean into, your tastes, your sensibilities, your voice. So in this new digital age, I often coach CEOs and people who lead companies, startup companies, to introduce themselves in a different way. And the way would be who you are. So you just add details. Details makes stories come alive. Joe Callahan would call them brushstrokes. Did anyone notice in his story when he was talking about Jonathan, he used one brushstroke for the boat that they took out onto Lake Michigan? Did anyone catch what color it was? It's a green boat. That's all he said. But it was enough to illustrate something in the mind. He calls them brushstrokes. So when you're introducing yourself, adding some detail, something, starts again lighting the creative imagination within the audience. Who you are, this is really difficult for people, but saying, you know, I'm really passionate about my job. I'm specifically really interested in costume dramas and scientists, and I know it's an odd combination, but you know, growing up, my mom is an art teacher, my dad is a scientist. So adding details, adding feelings, it starts again making things more personable and alive. And what you do, try a metaphor. And one way to build a metaphor, because metaphors sometimes can seem difficult, is to just create a simile. So my job is like standing on stage every day and having to give a long lecture and then erase the is. So my job is like, oh, sorry, erase the like. So my job is standing on a stage all day. So you can create a simile, take out the word like, and you have instant metaphor. If we had more time, I'd call on you guys to make you do this. But one way to do it is, again, saying who you are, add details, brushstrokes, add some feelings about it, and try a metaphor. Try creating a simile and taking out the word like. So has anybody created for their work? I'm sure the filmmakers have, but podcasts, videos, and writing and blogs. Okay, so there's certain hacks we're going to go through very quickly. Certain hacks where you don't need to be an expert in these things, but you kind of need to know the trick about how to make them work. So podcasts. Story hack one is reverse engineering. What do I mean by that? Podcasts, sometimes, especially if you're looking at true crime podcasts, unless it's serial, that did it a bit differently. You kind of know what the ending is. You know what the punchline of the joke is, and you're trying to find the most interesting way to get to that punchline. So at Expo North, we did a podcast called Unforgotten, which is stories of Highland women that haven't really kind of changed history, but were forgotten by history. And we know what their stories were. We know how it ended. So really the question was, to tell this podcast, what's the most interesting way to tell their story? What's the most interesting journey to that destination we already know? So story hack, reverse engineering. Radiolab techniques. So actually really being clever. We're going to listen to a clip of Radiolab. Do you guys know Radiolab? Do you listen to it at all? It's a really excellent podcast, really innovative and fun. And we're going to listen to some of the techniques they use, which is multiple voices. It keeps people interested to have multiple voices. They had to figure out a way to show you DNA editing audially. And so it's really fun to hear what they've done creatively with that. And then Ira Glass, who I adore so much, and I am not embarrassed to admit, one of my first emails was saving myself for Ira Glass at gmail.com. I love him so much. He's a podcast producer. He works for NPR radio, National Public Radio in the States, and he has some excellent storytelling advice. So let's just run through these.
They basically described something weird in E. coli, and they said, we don't know what this is.
E. coli are bacteria inside humans, and like all living things, E. coli is made up of DNA, A's and T's and C's and G's. And what happened was that these scientists were reading a chunk of that genetic code when
they found this really strange stretch of DNA.
Strange how?
Well, so basically what it was 5 identical sequences in a row. And then they were separated by very short sequences in between them that were all different from each other.
These little blurbs would be like,
and they looked at this and they're like, what? This is nothing like we've seen.
Do you guys hear that techniques of multiple, you can't hear it? So interesting. Multiple voices. Did you hear the multiple voices happen? That conversational tone? No.
We heard the voices, not the bleeps.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, that's never happened before either. But so you hear where the bleeps would have gone in. So what they do is they make sure that no one speaks for too long, which is probably a note I should take for some of these lectures. No one speaks for too long. You hear multiple voices going. These are not people on an ivory pedestal or on, in an ivory tower or some kind of pedestal. These are people who are really conversationally talking about science. So that was another huge innovation that the Radiolab did. And they try to use soundscapes with music, with interesting beeps, to keep people's attention going. And it really does work. It's so interesting. This, I think, is going to be Ira Glass, the podcast producer. And I really want you to remember what we talked about when you're listening to him about the associative power of the creative imagination, taking time out to let your mind wander. This leads to this, leads to this.
I mean, one of the things I think is really important if you're making stories for television or radio is that you understand the building blocks of the stories. And there are different ways to think about this. One of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to think about it the way that you learned in high school, which is in high school, we're all taught that the way that you write is that there's like a topic sentence and then there's like the facts which fill out the argument. In broadcasting, it's completely different. In broadcasting, I think you have 2 basic building blocks and they're very powerful and you can use them as you will. And one is the anecdote. And an anecdote is literally just a sequence of actions. If you think of it as just like what is a story in its purest form? A story in its purest form is somebody saying, this happened, And that led to this next thing, and that led to this next thing, and that led to this next thing, like one thing following another. And some of the things in the sequence could be, and that made me think of this, and then I said this, like there could be thoughts and ideas as part of it, but like one is leading to the next, leading to the next. And the power of the anecdote is so great that no matter how, in a way, like no matter how boring the material is, if it's in a story form where there's an anecdote happening, and then he said this to me, and then I went here, and then I came downstairs, and I thought, like, what the hell? Like, it has a momentum in and of itself that no matter how boring the facts are, like I'm trying to think like like, okay, there's, if you try to think like the most boring possible story, okay, there's a guy and he wakes up and he's lying there in bed and the house is very, very quiet, just unearthly quiet. And so he sits up and he puts his feet on the floor and he walks to the door of his bedroom. And again, just very, very quiet, walks down the stairs, looks around, just unusually quiet. Now, like this is the most, like what I'm telling you is the most boring possible fact pattern, and yet there's suspense in it. It feels like something's going to happen. And the reason why is because literally it's a sequence of events. Like this guy is doing this thing, he's moving from space to space. You can feel through its form that when you have one thing leading to the next, leading to the next, you can feel inherently that you're on a train that has a destination and that he's going to find something.
So all of these videos are on YouTube. You can type in Ira Glass and he gives you the most incredible advice about storytelling, especially for radio and podcasts. Videos, like we're going to watch an example first, but videos, basically the hack to videos is weird wins. If you're looking to get success on YouTube for your organization, for your own work, for it's still true, weird does win. I'll give you an example. There is a commercial that was made and they needed to use data that they collected about the way women start their mornings. And they were also hired by, well, we'll see if you can guess what they're selling you by the end of this commercial, but they really took to heart that weird wins and it works.
Like most women in commercials, I love to start each day doing yoga in my underwear.
Or journaling in my journaling nook.
And eating a wholesome, farm-fresh breakfast with a tiny spoon that I bought from a company that gives tiny spoons to underprivileged children.
Huh. According to science, most professional women don't have time for any of that.
Not that we need research to prove it, but there's research to prove it.
57% of us are up before the sun is up. 21% of us check our work email before even getting out of bed.
What?
Let's go get that morning meeting.
9% of women cite dry shampoo as one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century.
I'm done.
33% of us never make our bed. Like, ever. 21% of us have used an article of clothing to camouflage a stain. Very nice.
Only 16% of women would describe their morning with the hashtag blessed. And that seems kind of high.
58% of women will swear at someone or something this morning. Oh.
You know what 100% of us do have time for? A real-life Pinterest board? Fermenting your own small batch kombucha?
Protos? No, an organic breakfast in a bottle.
That's why we created.
So the whole thing was about yogurt, which is a very weird way to sell yogurt, but they were able to use data, have like a very strange tone, make it a little comical. But really, if you're looking at YouTube series or YouTube or any kind of digital content that is a video online now with social media, weird does win. To give you some very flash forward examples, one of the biggest YouTube videos was a hamster eating a burrito. If anyone's seen that one. Pez is a great stop motion animation artist who uses found objects. We're just going to quickly run through some of these. Honda used what Americans call a Rube Goldberg contraption. They took a car apart and used car parts to create this incredible kind of sculpture. It was a wild, weird idea and it did really, really well. And Mentos plays on people's arachnophobia and it becomes also a very, very weird commercial. So this has a crazy amount of views. It's a tiny hamster eating a burrito. You don't need to hear the music, it's fine. So you can imagine, you know, the amount of work you spend on like a beautiful video for our client or a video for a museum or even PR, and then suddenly a hamster eating a burrito gets a huge amount of views over yours. Weird really does win if you're looking for digital content. Again, this is Pez. Pez is really cool. Pez uses found objects for stop motion. So you get the idea there. We're going to skip the Honda commercial. This is a Mentos commercial for the candy. So again, playing that expectation weird wins. So if you don't feel like making something weird, then a DIY informational is really good. Remember couching how to build a fence within a story. You can make it short or sweet, or again, emotionally raw and compelling. So blogs, it's actually blogs are exploding now with things like Patreon's done a whole new section on blogs. You can teach people how to do things on Patreon, which is so interesting. Substack, again, is really excellent in making blogs and kind of digital form writing really popular. So again, often you can boil these down to, these are hacks, making it personal, making it well-researched, like Brain Pickings is a really good site where it collects historical letters or interesting insights about a particular person, and it's just very well researched. Or you make it creative, like the Zucchini and Space blog. And the last thing I'd say is you're not in it alone. There are strength in numbers when it comes to digital storytelling. And what I mean by that is I've seen some really fun partnerships, surprising partnerships between organizations, between digital creators, between filmmakers and textile artists. And actually, the more you reach out to your community of creative people, the stronger you get. And one example of this is, did you guys see when two British museums got into a Twitter war? This is when X was called Twitter. And it was really fun. It lasted over the course of 2 exhilarating days, used dinosaurs and robots as weapons, and pitted 2 of London's greatest superpowers against each other, the Science Museum and the Natural History Museum. And it started as something very benign. I think one of the museums posted like, hey, it's so exciting, we have an extra dinosaur exhibit. And then the Science Museum was like, well, we see your dinosaur and we raise you a black hole, but we are now housing. And so they just got into a total Twitter spat, and people were so excited by it. It raised the profile of both museums. And so you're able to, I really don't want you to feel that you're storytelling in a vacuum. Sometimes actually reaching the hand of friendship across the aisle of some really interesting collaboration or partnership really strengthens the storytelling and makes it very interesting. I'm sorry we flew through that, and it's bang on 12. We do have time for questions, so I'm going to exit this and stop sharing. And for those folks who can stay on a little bit, I'm very happy to stay for some time to ask or answer any questions you have. And Alex, I might call you in to manage some questions you might see. And if you don't, I totally get if you have to go off too. If you don't have any questions, that's fine too. I will say this, Expo North has some really fantastic digital content. Alex alluded to it, that's still up there. And some of the people who I featured in this talk, like Maria Tatar is on our podcast, Jay O'Callahan, there's a lot of people making really great content for us that you can kind of dive into some of these topics. Because an hour is like a very superficial time to talk about storytelling. So there's a lot more there. And I do just want to thank my team, Alex and Jenny and everybody in the office, and especially Ian. There's some really special people when you work for organizations like this. When I worked at NASA, Ed Hoffman was one of these guys. Ian Hamilton is another, where they are in it to do the most good for the creative industries, and they empower their people and their team to do so as well. And they really set the tone of just focusing on helping people. So if it weren't for him, none of this would be happening. And I just want to thank him.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jess. We appreciate that and appreciate your time. Fantastic. And what I'll say is I know we had some technical glitches with the presentation. So what we might do is try and make some of that available and send some of the clips to you guys, and maybe even some of the themes that we covered during the presentation, along with some other resources. And as Jess says, we'd like to thank you again for your time. We really do appreciate it. And the project is still live until the end of January next year. We've got so much resources online, so please do stay connected to us. And Jessica, thanks so much again. We appreciate you and great presentation, and thanks to you all. Thanks so much.
Nice one, folks. Thanks very much. That was really good.
Thanks, Campbell. Nice to see you.
You too.
Thanks, that was really useful, informative. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you. That was great. Cheers.
Thanks all. I'm going to head now. Just copying some links there. So
yeah,
great session. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
You got, I know we were really short on time, but do you have any resources that you could point us to for more hacks for making your blogging storytelling better?
Absolutely. So one thing, are you looking to do a particular project before I just kind of blanket give you, are you looking for an online blog for yourself, for an organization, for
myself?
For yourself?
Yeah.
And is an adjunct to any social media you're already doing, or would this be completely new, like a new thing for you?
Well, I guess I should back up. So I've started blogging for the job that I'm in tourism.
Great. Okay.
And I'm also about to start a blog for myself, hopefully developing a tourism business kind of down the road. Both of them, I have active social media following. In fact, I have better for my business, for myself, I have a much bigger following on social media than I do for my business.
Okay.
And so, yeah, but anything for both of them actually would be really helpful.
So that helps me kind of maybe make a suggestion for you, because clearly you know what you're doing if you're already blogging for a tourism group and you already have, sounds like, a following for your social media. I think not to toot their horn too much, but I think Substack might be a really good platform for you. And the reason why is Substack's incredibly easy to follow. So for people who are already following social media, it links in with your social media. So it's a great platform, but also the algorithm that they use is more democratic than others, in the sense that they kind of don't use hashtags, and they don't assume that certain groups of audiences will like your work over others. So what they'll do is anybody within the space that you're writing in, suggested blogs will come up, and you can actually get more of an audience that way, because there's a huge community on. So they're not looking at your own audience and gearing it towards them. You'll get new readers because of it. And it's really nice. It's very easy to use. You can control what your site looks like. That I would recommend doing Substack.
Okay, great. Thanks.
On Substack, there are loads of writers who talk about blog writing. And so there's, once you get involved with that community, there's loads of resources there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any more questions? We'll let Gemma wrap things up. Gemma, thanks to you again for all your help with the webinars over the last couple of years. You've been great. We appreciate you.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, if that's all the questions we have today, thank you everybody for joining us. This recording will be available on our website probably in about a week's time, roughly. I have put a link in the chat box for that because that is where you will find our video archive of all our previous workshops that we've recorded over the last few years. So I have put that up there. And thank you ever so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.